You're listening to Cottontail's podcast, part of the Silicon Valley Black Project, which produced the documentary film A Place at the Table about the Black pioneers of Silicon Valley. A Place at the Table can be viewed for rent on Vimeo.com on demand /A Place at the Table STEM. Through Cottontail's podcast, the Silicon Valley Black Project will continue to recognize the contributions made by African Americans. We will be featuring African American professionals, technologists in the fields of engineering, administration, and entrepreneurial pursuits from the past and present. We're talking to Clennita Justice, presently working as a program manager for Google. Her mathematical skills and interest in technology were nurtured and encouraged by her father and extended family, who were all versed in mathematics. Her interest in software engineering led her to the University of California, Berkeley, Howard University, Silicon Valley, Lucasfilm, and finally to Google. So are you working on site or are you working from home for Google?
I work from home. Yeah, I'm a program manager. There's no need to be on site.
How's that working for you, though?
I like it. I think I'm more productive being at home because it's just me and my husband, and he works nights. I have really no disturbances other than the ones I create for myself. So I'm definitely more productive at home than I think I was going, spending time either commuting in my car or on the bus.
Tell me about Clennita when she first decided that she was going to be in technology.
So actually, when I started college, technology was not where I started. I started out in business. Okay. So my uncle worked for IBM. He was a systems administrator at IBM. And so he told me to go in business. And so I did at the University of Denver. My first semester was business computing. And I loved it. And I'm one of those people that when I really like something, then I want to be as good as I possibly can. And so I knew I was hooked when I was like going to the professor's office hours and asking why I got one problem wrong on the pop quiz. Like I got 9 out of 10, but I wanted to know why, what I did wrong on that one problem that I got wrong. Thought processes was that I didn't want to go to school and learn to read and write. I thought I already knew how to read and write. And so computer science was so new to me, and it wasn't necessarily very popular at the time. So it was something worth paying for. That's how I decided on technology. But the other thing, in retrospect, my dad, who majored in poli-sci and got his degree from Cal State LA and then went on to law school, he's a natural spatial designer. So he'll, without thinking much about it, he'll design, do architects, he'll map out a room, he'll, he taught me how to use a slide rule. He bought one of the early calculators. He bought a digital watch in the late 60s, early 70s. Math primarily and engineering were always in my space growing up. And then my uncle, who worked for IBM, system administrator, I also have his older brother. He worked for Northrop as a computer programmer. In fact, he was the first Black computer programmer at Northrop. Looking back, I was being nurtured. I was always surrounded by technology in some form or fashion. And that was nurturing that problem-solving mindset. When I decided as a freshman that computer science would be my major, some aspect of it felt natural. It did not intimidate me or strike me that I was the only one. In my junior, senior, that maybe being by myself, not having anybody that looked like me as a role model became sort of something that I was aware of. Towards the end of my first year at University of Denver, I I wanted to study computer science as it related to business and not just the theory of computer science. And that was difficult to find. I started looking for programs that were like business and computer science. And I found a couple, but I didn't get financial support when I applied to those schools.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of came home from my first year not having a plan of like what I was going to do. I didn't want to go back to Denver because they weren't going to allow me to do business and computer science. And then I also was really homesick. I ultimately decided that I would go to Berkeley, and I gave in to not having computer science and business hand in hand because at Berkeley I had the same issue. Those two schools are very separate.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to do computer science at Cal. The interesting thing about Cal is they had two versions of the CS program at Cal. And the only difference between the two programs was one, the general courses were humanity based, and the other, the general courses were engineering based. So, in engineering you have to take physics and chemistry. And when I went to letter science, I took philosophy and geology. And it was a challenge. I was smart. There was a lot of family and emotional baggage that I carried while I was in college. And so the emotional things outside of school that I had to do or deal with, it affected my schooling. I actually failed out of Cal, and I had mental illness and didn't realize it. Later as an adult, I was diagnosed as a chronic depressive. Or I experienced chronic depression. So in looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, I was very depressed. And I had a lot of self-esteem issues. And I think, looking back, I probably could map that to one being the only. Because a lot of times, I was it'd be 250 people in an auditorium and I'd be the only Black person. And that was it. I really liked the study of computer science. Like I never lost that. And that's the only thing that kept me going. That passion for understanding how the technology worked. So I always had motivation and I was very resilient. So when I failed out, I actually did a couple of things. One, I went and got an internship in Silicon Valley to prove that I had the chops in the field to myself and to others. And the other thing I did was I took extension courses. So as many people know, UC Berkeley has a program, UCB Extension. I got the opportunity to take a couple of the courses that I had failed as an extension course. I think one of them was compilers and the other one was operating systems. And then I worked full time. And on my in Silicon Valley, while I took these courses part-time, I was able to get back into Berkeley. I met a mentor that really helped me understand computer theory. He was a graduate student. And when I was working in the Valley, he actually drove me to Berkeley on the day that I had my interview with the department to get back in to school. I had a meeting with the College of Letters and Science counselor, and he accused me of wanting to major in computer science for the money. This is not, 1999 or 2000, 2001, where, we're having this boom in technology, in computer science and Silicon Valley and technology in general. This is, 1985, 86. I don't even know there was money in it, right? I didn't even know there was money in it. So I remember, he got so incensed, he started yelling at me, this white guy, and I ran out of there crying because I felt so unseen. Like my uncles were supportive. My dad was off and on. He just wanted to make sure that I was well and happy. And so when it got hard, he was like, oh no, just don't do that. And I'm like, but no, that's what I want to do. And so there was a semester he convinced me to major in philosophy because it would be easier for me. And I did. And then I, came back to myself and said, no, this is not where I'm going. It's not what I want to do. So I felt like in a lot of ways, on multiple spaces, I was the unicorn. And I was like really like rebelling against, normalcy. And so that was really hard. And my dad had my dad had a hard time seeing me go through the similar things that he went through, but then not acquiescing to the pressures caused him some moments of being uncomfortable. Like, how can I support my daughter when I think she's going down a path where she won't be supported in it, and it's going to be a hard road to go down, as a Black woman. He often tried to convince me not to finish my major in computer science and department. So they decided that I had done enough to get back into school, but I was still a non-major. And so I still had to continue to take my major courses, not being a computer science major. So I did, and I did okay. I was very involved with the Berkeley Engineering Student Science Association. That group became sort of my support system. I stayed taking courses, but the family and life issues never went away. Like tests and especially finals were not I was not well suited for them at the time. And I didn't know, I was so caught up into push forward and, do what I'm being asked to do that I didn't step back and look at my mental health and support myself in a way where I had good mental health and coping skills in order to get through school. So I just I was always on thin ice.
Okay.
Like, I got to my final semester, finished my classes, and I actually had to have another meeting with the chair of the CS department to convince them to let me get a degree in computer science. I went through the application process to get into CS, and they denied me. They rejected me. I went through an appeal process. They rejected me. And so I was at my wit's end, and I remember I was at my job in Silicon Valley. I had a summer internship. And I have to say, my jobs gave me that validation that I could do the work. And so I always got really great, glowing recommendations from managers that I worked with. And I loved the work that I was doing. I had a resume with like probably a year and a quarter of work experience in Silicon Valley, which was not common for other, computer science majors. Right. That was unique. And I had 2 job offers. When they had the graduation ceremony, I was asked to speak. Want me to what? So they decided instead of, I don't know if they didn't have a valedictorian or because I have to say, the other thing that I think is probably worth noting is that when I was at Cal, the program went through a transition. So like the actual structure of the program was dramatically changed such that I had to go back and retake 2 CS courses because there was it was burgeoning object-oriented programming, which is very common now. It did not exist at the time that I was at Cal, but the smart minds were thinking about it, and so they wanted to shift from Pascal and Fortran to C. Yeah, I never forget that course was like a huge class because all of us had to retake it. Right. And the first midterm, majority of people felt they couldn't even do a curve. The second midterm, majority of people didn't do well. So basically, by the time you got to the final, your grade was based on your final grade that you got in the course because they didn't know how to teach what they were teaching. And somebody from the industry had come to teach the course, so they weren't, well versed in, academics. It was a mess, but we got through it. I just was happy to get out of Cal when I got out of Cal. And somebody said, "Well, do you want to go to grad school?" I was like, "No, I don't want to go to grad school. I just want to take a breath." And the other interesting thing that happened, because I had all this work experience, I actually was told by the counselor, but I got the highest job offer, highest salary of anybody in my class for job offers. And so I ended up, and I had two companies competing for me. And one of my cousins was like, "You're like a football player," because this is before we had mobile phones and stuff, right? So I had the recruiters from the different companies calling me during Christmas vacation at my cousin's house in LA. So that was really cool and stuff. But I ended up, one was in Chicago, one was in the Silicon Valley, and deciding to stay in California because I know California. Right. And so I ended up taking a job in the Valley at a company called Tandem, which doesn't exist anymore. But HP was a big competitor of theirs, and Tandem eventually got bought by Compaq, and Compaq eventually got bought by HP. The thing is that when I was at Tandem, I met a lot of older Black technologists, and I remember one in particular. She was from Mississippi. Mm-hmm. She got her math degree, and I can't remember her name, but she was so supportive. Mm-hmm. I mean, she worked for HP, but Tandem was right next to HP, right. And so HP was considered old Silicon Valley, and Tandem was new Silicon Valley. Yes. So its focus was online transaction processing. It was called Tandem because they ran two processors simultaneously, so mm-hmm. one would be the backup for the other. So it was fault-tolerant processing. Yeah. I did thrive at Tandem for a long time. Mm-hmm. I was there, I think, 5 years, but it wasn't until my last year at Tandem that I ran into very overt racism. I ended up taking a contract position at Apple because the other thing that I was doing is that when I got out of school, I really started pursuing my love of dance. While I worked at Tandem, I taught hip-hop courses, so hip-hop courses in fitness clubs. And then I was on a Nike-sponsored hip-hop dance troupe called Culture Shock. And I had started doing commercial acting on the side as well. When I took the job at Apple, I took it so that I could do my dancing and my acting and be a programmer. The deal was that I took the contract, and anytime I needed to take the day off, I just had to give them 24 hours notice. Which worked out really well because most of the time I didn't know until the day before whether I had gotten a job or not. So it was definitely a life of many hats, and that and it was great, but it was also exhausting. And I decided at some point that I needed to combine my love of the arts with my technology, logical problem-solving brain. I would go to the Apple Library and start reading up on multimedia. And because I have a love of movies and narratives and storytelling, I really started getting involved in that. And then I decided to take a class with UCB Extension on Java programming for multimedia. And then I started telling people that this was my new interest. And I was thinking of shifting my career slightly to move into that space. Mm-hmm. One Monday, a friend of mine sent me an email saying that Howard University was standing up a multimedia applications department or lab, mm-hmm. and they were looking for graduate students. And so I contacted Howard, and they're like, "Well, send us your resume." So I faxed them my resume. And they're like, "Oh, we would love for you to apply." In this period of my life, I always say God was working overtime because I sent my resume on a Monday. Tuesday, I officially applied. By Friday, they had accepted my application. So I have been accepted to Howard University with a scholarship, a full scholarship. That Friday evening, friends of mine that they were like, "Oh," I was called to tell them the news. They're like, "Oh, you need to come over and meet my aunt who's in town from DC." And so I go over to meet her, and she has an empty apartment in DC because she's staying with her daughter wherever her daughter lived, and wanted to know if I wanted to, sublet it from her. And so I had a full scholarship and a place to live. So all I had to do was get myself there in a month. So I packed up my life and moved to DC to go to Howard to study multimedia applications. Get to Howard, and Howard's a different beast. Like, Howard is a small Black college in DC, which is south of Mason-Dixon line, which I didn't know until I got there. And I'm this California chick, who went to a large, predominantly white college as the only, worked in Silicon Valley for 7 years as one of only. And so I had a tough transition because the culture was different. It was East Coast, West Coast. It was large, college to small college. And it was DC,
yeah,
which has its own uniqueness. And I loved DC, but it took me a while to get comfortable in DC. They brought me there and they wanted me to chair what they called an internet conference, like the first month. And they expected all the speakers, and they expected that I would have contacts and I would bring all these speakers in, and because I was from Silicon Valley, which was like this utopia, a bastion of technology, and so I was in shock because I'm like this only child. I'm still this introvert and only child, and the one thing that I did that was really smart is that I knew that I wanted to do my graduate degree different than I did my college degree. So the first thing that I did was go to health services at Howard and find a therapist. Say, you're going to be my friend for the next 2 years while I figure out how to get through this school. But it was really rough. I ended up, I did well, but I often had professors telling me that I acted like they worked for me, but then I worked for them, so I was not a subservient student. I still had the mentality that I was paying for an education, even though I was on scholarship, and that I should be afforded certain services that were a counter to how Howard thought of themselves in the hierarchy that exists sometimes in small institutions. But I got a really good friend, and she was an electrical engineer, graduate school. And so she became my, ride or die. And I got through Howard. I did much better at Howard than I did at Berkeley. I had a 4.0 at Howard, thank God. I said, I got to go back to California. I need a break. I need to get back to my comfort zone. I was doing a project for the department chair of CS. I was developing an online tutorial to do like basic CS education for him using Macromedia Director. The NSB conference is going to be in Anaheim, and I'm like, cool. And for those of you that don't know, NSB it's National Society of Black Engineers. He said, well, if you can do it for $800, I just got an $800 grant. If you can do it for $800, here you go. And I'm like, I can get back to California. And I knew if I got to California, then I had a higher probability of getting an internship in California. And so I went to the NSB conference. This is God working again. With my resume and I had what one would call their abstract for my dissertation that I was playing around with, that I wanted to do my dissertation on. But I went up to Silicon Graphics, and SGI for short. And I happened to talk to this guy who loved my pitch. And he's like, you know what? I know the perfect team for you. They were not intending on taking an intern this summer. So, it's a long shot, but basically I'm going to route your resume to this team. It's, going to be, a tight timeline for me to make this happen. And I'm like, okay. So, of course, all that happened. And I thought I literally bombed the interview. Like, because I bombed with one particular person. And so I'm like, I'm not going to get that job. And the guy that I bombed with called and offered me the job, and he knew what he had done. And he's like, I bet you thought you weren't going to get the job. And I was like, yeah, I always do the interview where I ask questions that I know people don't know the answer to, just to see how they handle it. But that's no indication that you're great. The job at SGI was with this team that built Studio Central, which was a database for multimedia applications. And so the idea is that Studio Central was a database for media. Their biggest contract and client was Lucasfilm. And I did a summer project as a thank you. I got a tour of Lucasfilm. So I got to go to Lucasfilm for the day, meet with the liaison between SGI and Studio Central that worked on the branch at Lucasfilm. Was introduced to the software engineering manager for the team that was using Studio Central. I go back to Howard. I continue doing my coursework. My last semester, I think it was January of 97, I am getting ready to start my dissertation, and I get a call from Lucasfilm saying, hey, we have a software engineering position open. We want to know if you're interested in it. So by February, I had the job. From February to April, I wrote my dissertation. I defended it, and then I defended it on a Friday, and on a Sunday, I got on a plane and flew back home, and started my job at Lucasfilm, working on a multimedia data asset management system for episodes 1, 2, and 3. My area of expertise was metadata. The other engineer was media. We had a great time. We came up with the holistic perception of we needed to be at every point of the film production process. But if we're really effective, we don't have to wait till the end. We can actually start with conceptual art. Lucasfilm was its own universe, right? And not Lucasfilm, but Star Wars was its own universe. And so all of this content at different stages was used in some way. Conceptual art books that were put together. It was in their publishing division where they were expanding the universe, telling all these stories by having writers write books. And so there was reference material for that. It was like magazine articles. It was museums. So I worked on the ranch, and then I worked on the second ranch. He built a second ranch. I worked there. I was there for 7 years. I did meet him a couple times. Oh, full circle. When I was dancing with Culture Shock, George Lucas's oldest daughter, Amanda, was on the dance troupe in the youth group. She had a Christmas party at his home. I went to the wrong house. It was in the guest house. So I went to the house. George Lucas answered the door. He walked me down to the guest house. And the whole time this is happening in my head, I'm like, I could work for him. He thinks I'm just a dancer, but I could work for him. And then,
full circle.
Full circle. I'm working for George Lucas.
It seems like you've been getting messages from God all along the way. He just kept sending you little packages.
God was, yes.
Or fate or whoever.
Yeah, God, universe, fate, coincidence, serendipity, all of those things. I believe in God, so I always like, God just got my back.
But the other piece of that is that you kept working and gaining more and more knowledge so that when that opportunity came, you had something to offer.
It's funny because I look back on that conversation with the letters and science counselor saying that I wanted to do it for the money, and I didn't. Some level of money eventually came.
But Clennita, what is wrong with doing it for the money?
Well, that's what I was going to say is that it doesn't seem like a negative anymore. Money is a motivator for me. Yeah. It took me a while to be okay with that. It took me a while to ask for more. Mm-hmm. When I got my job at Lucasfilm, they wanted to know what my base salary was the last time I was working. And I remember not wanting to tell them because I didn't know what I didn't know. It was $30,000 more the last job I had before grad school. So basically going to grad school, boosted my salary by $30,000. It's easier to do research to know what the base salary is, right? I recommend you do your homework and find out what the going salary rate is, for somebody with skill set. And and experience to set your, what you want your salary to be. Not only was I the only Black woman in the room, but I was often, one of 2 or 3 females in the room. Like, this was 1984 to 1989 when I was at Cal. There were, not only was it a very small, group of people that were majoring in computer science during that time, it was predominantly white male.
Right. So you were a rare fish to begin with.
I was, yes, exactly.
Male or female, and then to be a Black female, that made you even more unique. So so obviously you were there for the money.
Clearly, that's my only motivator.
All this nonsense you have to put up with for the money. You had to love what you were doing in order to put up with what you had to put up.
But I had to. Yeah, that was my saving grace, is that I really loved what I was doing, and I still do today. Lucasfilm went through a major reorg, so I worked for Lucasfilm proper, which was the small company that did one film at a time. And so what was really great about Lucasfilm is that we got royalties from every film. So if you were on episodes 1, 2, and 3, you got royalties from each of those films as they were produced and went out into the public. George Lucas was awesome. He was really huge about profit sharing.
Wonderful.
The CFO became the president of Lucasfilm at the time because they had a software engineering team at ILM, and so they merged us, and I was not happy. I was no longer happy anymore, and so it was time for another change, because I was coming out of my shell of being an introvert and wanting to engage with people and have conversations around requirements and analysis. I really liked that part of my job, and so I started studying program management on the side. Project Management Institute was the certification that seemed to be the most well-known in the industry. Got my certification from PMI. Became a program management professional, and then Lucasfilm laid me off. I left Lucasfilm with this PMP. I got a job at Apple as a creative, and I did that for about 4 months. Full circle, I come back home, and I get a contract at Apple as a PGM for Final Cut Pro. I almost took a full-time job at Apple, but they had a hiring freeze, so I ended up leaving Apple, went to Sony Ericsson for a year, worked on mobile apps as a program manager, and then Google called. And so I ended up having this 2-hour conversation with a recruiter, just exploratory about the things that I was interested in. The recruiter kind of warned me that Google interviews can be kind of challenging and you have to study for them. And again, God, I walk into this interview and basically they asked me the questions of the things that I had studied.
Perfect.
And that was like the one interview experience that I can say was like the most fun that I had in an interview ever. It was awesome. I didn't go to that interview like wanting the job. I was just, because I wasn't, at this point I had a job. I wasn't losing a job.
Wanted to ask you, now that you're settled, you're in Google, are you planning on staying there for a while, or do you have plans to start your own organizations? What are you thinking?
So right now, I am staying at Google. There's nothing compelling me to like say it was time to make a move. Where I am now is I like it. I do miss the work that I did on stories and media. Right now I'm focused on user-centric development and helping developers do their product development from a more user-centric perspective, and so that we meet the needs of the users more effectively. Sometimes I think about like doing my media stuff on the side, but I just haven't found the bandwidth. Taking care of my 2 parents is a huge responsibility.
Were you raised in Silicon Valley area, or were you raised in Southern California?
So I was raised in Southern California up until high school, and then I went to high school in Oakland.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I went to high school in Oakland. So I call myself a California girl through and through.
If you could look back in your first year of college, if you could look back then, and you could see yourself, what would you tell yourself?
So when I was in college, I used to always go, I just want to know everything's going to be all right. And so I would probably tell myself, everything's going to be all right. You're good. It's going to be hard, but you have incredible resilience. You may not always be fully aware of your passion for the work that you're doing, but it comes from a true place, a real place inside of you. And so that's going to sustain you, and you're going to be okay.
And I think you would have enjoyed hearing that. You would have said, "Oh, great."
I was like, thank you.
Yeah.
Could you
Hello.
just come back and keep telling me that?
Please. Can you show up next week at the same time?
Right. I just need to hear it over and over and over again. Periodically.
I listened to your path, and that's quite a journey.
Yeah, it's funny. I was like, well, it's not average.
No.
But it's not. There's no like grand gesture, at the end that like, oh, and she like started her own company, and like, it's just the very unique and miraculous road of navigating college and Silicon Valley and just maintaining.
Yeah.
Like, and I like to use the word staying relevant.
Yes.
And,
well, I'm hearing words like relevance and also sustainability and what were the revelations that came to you on your path? What were some of the things that you could say there were these aha moments for you, and how would you describe it?
Oh my God, there were so many. Because computer science requires you to be a constant learner. Like what I learned at Berkeley, practically, is not anything that I can apply to today. So I shouldn't say practically. The technology and that I learned at Berkeley doesn't apply today. But I would say the concepts of computer science and computers and programming have not changed. Like those are constant, and those were embedded in me at Berkeley from the start, and those have carried me through my career. And first aha probably is that I have the right foundation to do this work and stay relevant in this work. Relying on that foundation of understanding the basic constructs of computer languages and the basic constructs of problem solving and algorithms is something that I, carried through as I learned new languages throughout my career. And now even as a program manager, when I worked directly with engineering teams, I was one of those PGMs that they didn't have any problem sending into the room to have a conversation with the engineers, because I wasn't afraid of talking to the engineers. And I didn't even realize that was a value or a skill set because I took it for granted. And so that was probably, one of my latest ahas. But when I was doing my storytelling system, that was an aha moment. Like when I started studying multimedia applications, I picked up a book on narratives, and then I found a book on how you could use an algorithm to tell a story. The aha is that, and I told you I had some correspondence with the MIT Media Lab. They gave me the resource of an AI algorithm, teach a robot instructions through natural selection based on a learning algorithm. And so I took that algorithm and rewrote it in Java to tell a story. What made it unique is that the stories were random. So you had a story space of information. Each piece of information was cataloged. And so the system would go through and find the next logical step or story or sentence that would follow the previous one to create a story. And so at the end, I did a bunch of analysis on whether it was a good story or not a good story. Here's the graph of that story. Here's where the computer made this decision versus another decision. And it was fun. And so that was an aha that, one could program a computer to tell a story. Like that was something that was possible and interesting. Because my aha sort of correspond to my transitions, I think. That my software engineering background had some valid use as a program manager to help engineers more effectively execute against their projects.
Well, there's two questions I have for you. One is, What advice do you have for me as a storyteller?
You know, a story has a beginning, middle, and end.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes in documentaries,
Mm-hmm.
having the climax is sometimes a challenge. Like you can do a documentary and you can have a beginning, middle, and end, but never really have sort of these climactic moments of whether the, protagonist or the, focus has to make a critical decision. I think my own personal opinion is that those are the documentaries that are probably more interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
When they create a journey for a particular famous character, or even a moment where they really hone in on all the different aspects that were coming into play up until this climactic moment that shifted everything. Like the autobiography of Malcolm X, it's one of my favorite books because he had these moments of he had to reinvent himself, and there were all these different aspects coming into play at any given moment where he had to, go within himself and make a decision. When he was a kid and his teacher told him he couldn't be a lawyer, and then at some point that coming back to him and going, no, she wasn't right. This is what I've accomplished as a thug. This is what I'm learning while I'm in prison, about my value and my power that's building up my self-esteem. And now this is the value that I can have going out into the world. And what was so interesting about Malcolm X is that he never forgot that he was a humble servant, that he was in service to something greater than himself. He has a powerful story of transformation and self-actualization, one that's good for the ages. Those are the things that make good stories. So even in our world of tech and Blacks in tech, I think all of us have those moments where we had to reinvent ourselves and go and do some self-actualization, because there's nobody that was rolling out the carpet for us and saying, hey, come along. Especially in the early days, right? They weren't doing that. And so a lot of our motivation, a lot of our resilience, a lot of our sustainability came from our ability of self-awareness and what mattered to us.
Yes, particularly Black women, I'm sure. What interested me was your transition from California to the East Coast.
The East Coast. I didn't stay.
What was the hardest part of that? What would you say was the hardest part of that?
You know what? The hardest part, I think, so I have a hard time with disappointing people. I have a hard time with conflict. And I felt like what they were expecting from this Black woman from Silicon Valley isn't exactly what they were getting. And so there was a level of disappointment that they had. Because I was just going there as a student, going there to learn. I hadn't considered that there was a value proposition for them accepting me beyond she would be a really good student, right? There was this concept of she's coming from Silicon Valley, and if we give her this, then we should get this.
Yeah, she'll bring right? Steve Jobs to the campus, right? Got it.
I bring connections, I bring jobs, I bring insight, and so there is this constant sense of me not living up to the expectations that they had of me, and especially being in a Black community that you want to give back and you want to meet people's expectations, and so it took me some time to at least figure out how I could provide value, and also it took me a while to provide value, and it took me a while to be okay with what I was good at and what I was not good at. Like I was always about being unseen. Like I was good being the backup. I was good, so there was a part of me that was good with being the only Black person in the room, because like Invisible Man, they don't see you. Like, but you're right. Like they don't see you.
No.
And so, but when you're Black in a Black community and you are studying pure science and you're a Black female, that you're very much seen.
Right.
And it's like, how great are you? And it's like, oh, God, I don't think I'm that great. So there was this transition that happened where I stepped into broader understanding of me and my value, and I started seeing me, you know, through the eyes and lenses of other people. That was the beginning of me coming out of my shell as an introvert, and and being a little bit more conscientious. And that was a lot of the work that I did with the therapist. So it was really good to have the therapist, because I was trying to hide, and she's like, "No, I don't think you're supposed to be hiding right now."
Come on.
And so yeah, that was one of the other things that came out of my experience at Howard, and so I look back, and I really value my experience at Howard. The academic was solid, but beyond that, it was doing things that gave back, which is how I ended up doing the tutorial, the online tutorial for the department chair, and I TA'd some courses, and into another course I took the lead and helped teach the group Java.
Okay.
So, because it was something that, it was a grad school program, and so we had to teach ourselves certain things, and so I taught myself Java, and then I taught other people Java, and yeah.
All right. Well, my dear, I really appreciate your time with you, but it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Yay! All right, nice meeting you, Kathy. Have a great
nice meeting you too.
Thank you, Clennita, for a candid look at your journey. Your desire to be a computer scientist never faltered as you made your way through the maze of Silicon Valley's early days. Your story of being a first and how you weathered those challenges will help someone else along the way. Lastly, being so forthcoming about seeking a therapist for your mental health and anxiety issues, yet holding on to your love of technology, is a portrait of strength and forbearance. Thank you for sharing your life with us, and thank you for listening.